Hello, I have completed both parts of the Elvisin on the maximum difficulty Akumo, which implies no damage. If I had taken damage even once, I would have had to start both games over from the very beginning. In addition to the main content, I also completed all 3 DLCs for the first Elvisin. This video is a commentary. In the first part, I talk about my project using my The Elvisin run as an example, explaining various nuisances and rules in detail. In the second part, I share my thoughts on each game in the series, that is, I give a kind of review of both games and summarize my permadeath run. I've left a timestamp for the second part in the description of this video. The Elvisin opens a new chapter on my channel. Over the next few months I will dedicate myself exclusively to survival horror games. I will complete several of the most famous series on maximum difficulty without death. I will finish the survival horror journey with a grand show, a marathon of multiplayer games on maximum difficulty without taking damage. My project has clear rules, many of which I discussed in the first commentary video on the Mass Effect series. The Elvisin allowed me to explain a few more. I consider it mandatory to explain these rules in detail so that no questions remain. I want to remind you that I do not invent these rules during my playthroughs. I have had a prepared list for a long time. Dumping the entire list on you at once would be stupid, so I only talk about the rules that actually come into play during recording. Loading from autosaves under certain conditions. You can first see this in my old Aliens vs Predator trilogy playthrough. Now, let's look at the Elvisin 2. Do you see the obvious similarity? In both cases, these are technical issues in specific parts of the game. In AVP you can instantly get headshotted and die at high FPS, which cannot be lowered if the player has removed the cap. In the Elvisin 2 there is no manual save before the shown fight, so for practice you either restart the episode or load a checkpoint. Here is another example of loading in the Elvisin 1 with my already recorded explanations. As you can see, I used an autosave. Why? The thing is, in both games of the Elvisin series, when you load a checkpoint, all enemies and interactive objects return to their original positions. In this case, that means enemy placement and their patrol routes. This is very important in order to know exactly where certain enemies will be on the location. I do not consider this cheating. According to the rules of my project, I am allowed to load autosaves if, and this is a very important if, the character is not directly in combat and after loading all elements of the game remain in their places, as is the case here. Now let's look at one of the deaths from the Mass Effect series. What? Oh my fucking god. I can't load. I don't know what to do. I am stuck inside the texture. But according to my rules, I can't load. I can't use any. We'll see.
Simple enough.
Going now. Affirmative.
Got it. They've reached the rear stairs. Switching to incentive.
That's it.
Fine.
That's it. As I said, I can't load. This would be too stupid to just load a bit in the middle of the battle. I assumed I could know about this issue, but I counted with it only now. I don't think I need to explain anything else after this. Everything should be clear. Recording clean intros in video games after completing the main content. Again, this rule is best understood through examples. Well, the original Dead Space and its remake are the best examples of this rule. As you can see, I am at the very beginning of the game. Before this, there was a ship crash and a walk to this location. No enemies, no threat. In the original Dead Space, there is a save point here. According to the rules of my project, I can start my run from this spot, because nothing could have harmed me at all up to this moment. Let me emphasize this. I can completely skip the very beginning of the game instead of recording it at the end of the playthrough. Now, let's move to the remake. The same location, but the save point is not available. Necromorphs will appear later, but I won't have a weapon. The same situation exists in the first Zeal Within. The first episode has an enemy, but no weapon. I will be playing Dead Space Remake without taking damage. This means that according to the rules of my project, for now, and the keyword here is for now, I can record this intro at the end of the game, because there is no variability in the circumstances. Either I pass this corridor without taking damage or I don't. But let's look a little bit further. Behind this door there is an enemy and I have a plasma cutter in my hands. There is no save point nearby. This means that I can no longer skip the intro and leave it for the end of the game, because I can miss a shot. That's the rule. Next rule. I'm not obligated to complete or record DLCs as a part of my project, but I usually do so if I like them. I'm also not required to choose the maximum difficulty for DLCs, even if I did so for the main game. The Evil Within is a perfect example. If the main game has a no damage difficulty Akumo, nothing like that exists for the DLCs. Moreover, in the Consequence DLC, the player cannot avoid taking damage from a specific enemy's grab. For Kidman's story, the developers created a different difficulty that does not interest me at all. In the end, I chose survival. I could have easily skipped the Executioner DLC, since it doesn't feature the Evil Within gameplay at all and isn't survival horror. But I didn't. If it were even slightly longer, I would have skipped it 100%. I also want to remind you of another already stated rule of my project: modifications and fixing developer oversight through targeted tweaks. I explained this in detail during the Mass Effect commentary. In short, I can do whatever I want with the game as long as it does not make it easier or break the essence of the challenge. The problem here is obvious. For one person, a certain modification is cheating, for another it isn't. For example, changing FOV in survival horror games. For someone else, even using mouse and keyboard is already unfair. There are no half measures here. Either I use mods or I don't. In my opinion, I'm not just allowed to install them, I'm obligated to. The Evil Within is a very good example. Without small mods and eternal setting changes, this game is almost unbearable. All the issues many reviewers and journalists talk about online have now been fixed through official patches and unofficial mods. That's it regarding the rules. Now, it's time for a few short personal stories. First, where have I been for the past few months? During the Mass Effect commentary, I said there are several serious problems in my life that are permanent but controllable. Sometimes the situation becomes genuinely heavy and a difficult period begins. More than 2 months ago, I almost immediately completed the Evil Within duology without taking damage, but then died due to pure randomness during the fight with the Keeper. After that, a crisis began, which can briefly be described as a conflict with a group of people. Fuck.
his leg. I'll show you. Doesn't matter. Just a second. Back. And it was close. Back. From his leg. You see? Everything is okay, but if I put mine on his leg, how can I say this? Fuck my mind. Needles, like inside the bomb, they go horizontally, like this, and like this to me.
They believed I was guilty of a serious offense. I was convinced they were slandering me. They pushed their agenda, I defended myself. They called the police and inspections, threatened court. I repeatedly found evidence proving I was right. After 2 months, both sides were exhausted and we agreed to jointly solve the problem in the building where we all live. In the end, it turned out that technically I was at fault. But because of their pressure, attempts to impose their view and treating me as an enemy rather than an ally, the solution was delayed for months. We realized that if we had worked together from the start, the problem would have been solved quickly without any conflict. We shook hands, I fixed what I had to fix, and we went our separate ways. Less than a week later, I completed both the Evil Within games without damage. I am telling the story for a reason. I want to emphasize that even though the crisis period has ended for now, another one can begin at any day. Right now, I'm actively training the next series for a permanent run. It shouldn't take much time. Where did the second camera and microphone audio go? The second camera is not coming back. It consumes too many system resources. The pros do not outweigh the cons. FPS during recording is more important to me. I turned off background audio recording because I decided to do voice-over commentary instead. The first Evil Within allowed this approach. The game is full of hidden, interesting content that can be misunderstood even when you are looking straight at it. The Evil Within 2 is much more primitive, but even there I found things worth commenting on from time to time. I may continue doing this kind of commentary in the future. This is part 2. It's time to analyze the Evil Within through the lens of my playthrough. The first Evil Within. I have a special history with this game. Once I was a very stupid and aggressive gamer who didn't want to learn how to play, only to win on maximum difficulties. In life, I lack confidence, fear challenges, and shifted responsibility onto others. High difficulties in video games were my way of telling myself that I was worth something, that I was achieving something. But because I didn't want to actually learn how to play on high difficulties, I couldn't beat games without massive amounts of saving and loading. I remember my favorite phrase from that time. Video games are easy and difficulty doesn't matter, all the player has to do is save and load constantly. I also loved blaming developers for my own mistakes. Supposedly, if the designers were competent, I wouldn't be stuck here for hours. The fact that I stubbornly did the same thing for hours without trying to understand the situation didn't bother me at all. I am saying all of this now for one reason. At first, I hated the Evil Within, but as I grew, I changed my perspective, accepted it more and more, and eventually came to love it. Because of this journey, unfortunately, I cannot give an objective analysis of the game. After finishing the run, I became interested in the development history of the Evil Within and other people's opinions. Beyond curiosity, I wanted to step outside my own bubble and look at horror through someone else's eyes. It was a complete surprise to learn that many years ago, when I was idiotically criticizing the game for everything, I was completely right about one thing. The Evil Within was not meant to be made. After Bethesda acquired Anga Gameworks, the developers were essentially forced to work on a survival horror game. This requires some context about Anga Gameworks and its founder, Shinji Mikami, known as the creator of Resident Evil and the father of the survival horror genre. But those are just labels on a very complex person with a long history in game development. A documentary about him was released a few years ago. I strongly recommended watching it. There is also a recorded conversation between him and Keiichiro Toyama, where Mikami said that making video games in Japan is like serving a prison sentence, where guards order you to work on something that will eventually become a video game.
だから今ゲーム業界も比較的健全にはなってますけど、当時やっぱり会社に住んでる人ちょこちょこいましたからね。
まあそうですね。だし、まあこれはちょっと誤解を与えるかもだけど、合宿みたいでちょっと楽しいかなと思ってたりするところもなくもなかったですね。
今のゲーム作りも楽しいですけど、あんなにしんどかった昔の方がなぜか思い出補完だと思うんですけど楽しかったんですよね。なんかあの時めっちゃしんどかった時めっちゃ楽しなかったっていう、ただ僕15年ぐらい業界入って気づきましたよ。一ついい例えが、何回か言ったことあるんですけど、ゲームが自由に作れる刑務所に入ってた。
それは
まさにぴったりな表現見つけたぞと思って15年経った時に発見しました。そういうことだったんだって。
Shinji Mikami eventually broke free through years of hard work and persistence. He viewed Resident Evil purely as a golden ticket to freedom, to finally do things right. First, he made a game for himself rather than management, God Hand, and then began working on his dream project, a Japanese game studio that wouldn't resemble a prison. In my opinion, he didn't quite succeed. I won't retell the entire story, you can find it elsewhere on YouTube. So I'll summarize briefly. Mikami wanted to create a company for talented, ambitious but inexperienced developers, where people could learn to make what they love, but that required funding, which didn't arrive in the right amount or at the right time. Eventually the omnipresent hands of ZeniMax Media reached out and Mikami unfortunately shook them. Years later he regretted it, saying he shouldn't have agreed to make something he didn't want to make. The Evil Within, a game born from an act of violation. Sorry if that sounds harsh, but in many ways it's true. Let me give another example to clarify my perspective. Imagine Sandfall Interactive, the creators of Clair Obscur Expedition 33, except in my dystopia they are bought by a massive multinational corporation and forced to work on something none of the developers care about. They are forced to use the corporation's technology, unable to find their own path. Any bold but naive idea is crossed out. Imagine that everything about Clair Obscur was the opposite, and you'll get the hell in which both the Evil Within games were made, and yet both survival horror games turned out not as terrible as one might expect. What is a high-quality survival horror for me today? I don't usually talk about this at length, so I'll just name 3 games I love for completely different reasons. Number 1. Resident Evil 4 Remake. A masterpiece that allows you to enjoy both the restraint of horror and the dynamics of a third-person shooter. Such a perfect balance would be impossible if this were not a remake. The original game was such a solid foundation that modern horror elements didn't destroy the structure. This is extremely rare. Dead Space Remake didn't manage that balance, but I love it for another reason. It is the only game that conveys sci-fi horror atmosphere at such an incredible level that nothing else compares. Dead Space draws me in with its inner beauty. The gameplay is excellent too, though I have personal issues with it that I'll discuss in another video once I finish my run. Resident Evil Remake. Yes, the one by Shinji Mikami. Nothing needs explaining here. A perfected classic survival horror belongs in my top 3. But as I said, each game has its own place. None stands above the others. It may seem funny that I listed only remakes, but the reason is simple and why publishers keep making them. Creating a high-quality new game based on a high-quality old one is far easier than building everything from scratch. Mikami could have taken that path, simply copying his old masterpiece. But he didn't, and that's exactly why the result earned my respect and love. What I like about the first The Evil Within? Most important, the ability to overcome the aiming system and truly learn to shoot accurately. By default the game doesn't allow this. Bullets scatter and even after upgrades Sebastian can still miss. But if the player is willing to spend dozens of hours solving this problem, the game allows it. Combine other weapons with the revolver creates a beautiful system where you, the player, is at the center with a genuine sense of mastery. Next, most episodes have unique structures with an extra layer for professional players, those willing to experiment and find unconventional solutions. When Jimenez runs to lure enemies away, my task is to reach the sadist as quickly as possible. I run into the bar even before his cutscene, which is why activating the trap was so important. It prevents enemies from being lured to me. I used to access against the boss and finish him off with firearms. You can do it without the shotgun as well. In that case, you'll need a few additional precise handgun shots. But you absolutely cannot lose the two axes. The final boss fight begins, Laura, which is of course optional.
Better run.
And that's it, the fight is over. And here is the final fight with Laura. I jump down and immediately activate either a glitch or a deeply hidden mechanic, infinite fire from the pipes. The discoverer of this trick was the speedrunner Jigsaw Killer, who simply experimented with everything here. As you can see, the fire is real. It deals exactly the same damage to Laura as if you activated the pipe once. Who would have thought that if you don't move from your starting position and always hit the eye, you become completely invisible? This is a problem with the player detection system in the stealth mechanics. It's especially noticeable in the Kidman DLC. And the last one, the upgrade system and save keys. Green Gel upgrades both Sebastian and his weapons, which already sets the game apart. The most interesting part is how limited this resource is for different players. Someone who doesn't know where the keys are will experience a much harsher, narrow game. Another player who collects all keys gains freedom and creative space. My Akumu run is just one possibility. In other words, the game gives you two roles depending on your green gel. You can be the conductor or just one of the musicians. I deliberately didn't upgrade the harpoon to firebolts and didn't touch the magnum. The reason will become clear later, towards the end of this episode. Freeze bolts are necessary for the next arena. The spinning blades instead of traumas on Akumo difficulty weren't played there by accident. The design of this arena is aimed at speedrunners who are forced to run through it rather than try to control it. The movement of the blades is completely random. It's pure RNG, as gamers say. I am not limited by time, so there are ways to control the situation. A regular harpoon doesn't activate the explosion because there is no fire, which is why I didn't upgrade it earlier. You can also freeze the blades temporarily with freeze bolts, but that's not as effective as simply hitting them accurately. And what I don't like about the Within. The absolute worst is the technical state. In its original form the game is unbearable. A 30 FPS cap? Seriously? I see in visual effects. Numerous bugs, some fixed, some not. Today everyone is practically required to install fixes and small mods just to play it properly. Some episodes have no value and exist solely to pad gameplay. I am fine with short games. Resident Evil 3 Remake is fine as a 1-hour experience because it presents itself that way. The Within contradicts itself. Some chapters are excellent, others feel like they were made by different teams, which is partially true. Chapters were developed separately and over long periods. Even the sci-fi elements like the STEM machine were invented just to stitch the game together. To properly see the first game, think of it as several small games forcibly sewn into one. The Evil Within is an example of a small team being forced to make a large AAA game instead of being allowed to grow through a smaller AA project. It's a nightmare example of how a corporation can squeeze people dry for theoretical profit, and how audiences see labels instead of real people. I'll now tell you the story of John Johannes, director of the spin-off Project Gaiden. Yes, The Evil Within 2 started as a small experimental game. Johannes wanted to find his own path in survival horror, starting with an indie project. But then the Man in Black from Bethesda, ZeniMax Media and Microsoft appeared, and everything went to hell. If you read about Shinji Mikami, you'll know he hates giving beginners huge budgets with demands to make AAA masterpieces. It leads to burnout. For 8 years he tried to remove the survival horror label from himself and his colleagues, but wasn't allowed to. The Evil Within 2 was the last barrier before Tango Gameworks could reclaim some freedom. Eventually Microsoft caught up to them, because such corporations don't care about people, only reputation and control matter. Microsoft and Bethesda wanted a survival horror conveyor belt brand to rival Resident Evil. When that failed, they shut Tango Gameworks down. Years later, Johannes said in an interview that working on the game was mostly a negative experience. He was proud of his team but said he didn't want to be a director of The Evil Within 2. He had no choice. He had no life outside work and because of huge stress has memory gaps from that period, almost like post-traumatic stress disorder. As for my personal relationship with the game, today I play games only for my permadeath project. I'll return to The Evil Within 2 only if there is a direct sequel, which won't happen. The game didn't resonate with me because its maximum difficulty classic is the opposite of what I value. Akumu wasn't originally planned, it was added because fans and Bethesda demanded a no damage difficulty. Classic removes the designer's main obstacle, Sebastian's progression. Upgrades are implemented terribly. Proper routing gives such an advantage that it feels like cheating. The game becomes boring and repetitive. Instead of rebalancing, the developers remove the system entirely. I hate that approach. I dislike artificial restrictions instead of thoughtful difficulty. Even if I push through, there is an insurmountable barrier for me. Constant running through empty areas and elsewhere monotonous stealth. Here I want to emphasize with a live example that all this running back and forth through these zones is the main reason why I won't play The Evil Within 2 again. Unless of course a third entry in the series comes out. According to the rules of my project, I am obligated to return to game series if direct sequels are released. Fortunately for me, that won't happen. The Evil Within as a series is dead. When you play The Evil Within 2, it feels like it was made by someone whose balls were crushed under a high hill. There is no intrigue in the game, no death, no complexity. After finish it, you don't feel like a discoverer, only like a winner who made it to the end credits. The game teaches you nothing, it merely quietly asks whenever you learned anything from others. The Evil Within 2 is an empty, emotionless game, as if it has undergone a lobotomy, or you could put it another way. The game apologizes for its predecessor for everything one could possibly imagine. But after reading the history of Tango Gameworks and learning about the directors and producers who didn't want to make a survival horror game, this doesn't surprise me at all. Time to wrap up. This video turned out long. I originally planned a side-by-side comparison of both games, but now I see that it's unnecessary. Every viewer can draw their own conclusions. I'll return to The Evil Within 1 much later, probably in a year or more. It's now part of an epic no damage series where I'll complete over 10 survival horror games back to back without taking damage. That marathon will conclude my journey through the horror genre, after which I'll move on to completely different games. I hope we all make it there safe and sound. Good luck and thank you for watching.
created this world. You cannot keep me here. Ruvik. I'm going to finish this.